talking about pitching, and we'll be responding to as many questions as we can. I will pass the mic now to Brother Shariff Raffi to introduce himself and go straight into his presentation.
Sure.
Go ahead, bro.
Assalamualaikum, everyone. Nice to have you this evening, depending on which part of the world you're at. It's about 10:30 here in Singapore or Southeast Asia, so it's pretty late. But I guess as startup founders, this is the time where we're probably most alive, right? So time is of essence, and we like to time box this within the next half an hour or so. So I'll just very quickly jump into a bit about my background. So myself, I've been a multiple-time founder. I've got a stint in a corporate VC, and I've been in the tech startup ecosystem for the past 15, 16 years ago. So I've had the opportunity to network and be friends with folks who have started companies, sold companies, have raised, from their seed round all the way through to their Series A, Series B. I've had the chance to observe funds who've started off life as a $10 million fund and now having closed, $150 million funds, right? Some of the startups I've built in the past, includes an edutech platform, a self-paced adaptive edutech platform, which we then pivot to help power social organizations with their peer mentoring programs. I've also run a social e-commerce site where we feature designs from artists from around the world, and then we sold it at a discount in a flash sale model. I've also run a mobile development studio, a business I was involved in, where we build all kind of enterprise-grade applications for banks to telcos to brands big and small. So it's quite a varied experience. Until very recently, I was also with I decided to join the darker side and be part of a corporate VC, venture capital, venture investment and innovation arm of a global bank. So it was nice to be on that side. The whole point of that was try to solve problems in a much more scalable way from a portfolio approach, right? So the main focus today is to obviously try and unlock some amount of funding. Now there's some key assumptions here when it comes to unlocking funding. We're assuming that you're building a venture-backed startup, right? So not every single venture or business that we build will be suitable to raise fund, especially from institutional investors such as venture capitalists and the likes. Some of them might be lifestyle businesses with very little limitations to scalability, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. Like, you can go ahead and build those business. You can make a very nice income stream for you, but that may not be something that investors may be keen to invest in, right? But if you're building something with the view of having a venture-backed company that would like to fundraise and scale at a really fast rate, then you'll likely run into a situation where you want to go out and pitch to folks, right? And so the main focus here is, assuming you're trying to build a venture-backed company, then how do you put together a piece of presentation and present yourself to would-be or potential investors, whether it be angels or even institutional investors, again, such as VCs, right? So what I want to do here today is a little bit unusual from the typical presentations that I do. Instead of just walking you through what are the typical components of a pitch, right? And the recipes to building a pitch deck, I thought I do things differently by showing you a pitch that I would do a pitch myself, right? And then I'll walk you through step by step the various components of my own pitch deck, and then give you some insights into the thinking behind the components of the various slides of the pitch deck, right? But generally speaking, when you're going to go out there and meet people and raise funding, you will need a few things in your toolbox, right? One is you will need an elevator pitch. Now, an elevator pitch is just a verbal pitch that you could communicate to someone when you see them in an event or on a short call or whatever the opportunity may be, right? And this could range from a 1-minute verbal pitch or it could be even a 30 seconds, or even a 10-second, what we call a Twitter pitch. So no more than 140 characters, 140, 150 characters. Now, that is one aspect of it. But those Twitter pitch or elevator pitch is just to help you garner interest, gain interest, to have one foot into the door. Now, once you get, you've garnered interest and you've built a level of intrigue, you'll likely be able to score a follow-up meeting, right? And this, again, in part to the COVID situation, this could be in the form of a call, if not an in-person catch-up. So likely it's going to be a call like this. So the bulk of that will then be your 5 to 10 minutes pitch. This would be your proper pitch deck style with the various components. So what I want to do is just very quickly list out the key components of a typical pitch deck, right? And remember, the whole point of a pitch is to help you move forward in the conversation, right? If it's a Twitter elevator pitch, it's to help you get the meeting. And then once you have that meeting, is for you to have that first introductory conversation to go deeper into your concept or your ideas, and then to score the follow-up meeting with, say, another partner in the fund, and then you work your way through from typically an analyst or an associate to then the partner, and then finally you will get to the IC level, right, or the investment committee, and that usually you'll get a yes or a no, and then if it's a yes from enough partners, then congratulations, you would have a term sheet, or you would have an offer on the table, and then everything's fine, and then hopefully. But to go through that gauntlet, those are the things that you need in your toolkit. Now let's assume you've sorted your Twitter pitch, your elevator pitch. Now, what are the key components of your main pitch deck, right? So there's usually about 10 to 12 key slides. This does not mean your slides will be actually 10 to 12 slides long. If you could, that's fantastic. I always have that problem when my slide decks are too long, way more than 12 slides. But generally, the components are, you would start off with, of course, your cover page or slide, and then where hopefully you'll be able to give a teaser or encompass what is it that you're trying to achieve. And then the next part is you have to go into the bit around what is the problem that you're solving, right? And that's obviously the key part. Like, the whole point of having a startup is, if you think about it, we're nothing more than just, if you dilute it down, a startup is nothing more than just an experiment, right? Around solving a problem that is meaningful and big enough. So being able to convey very quickly what is the problem that you're solving and who is this problem for is very, very, very important. We call that the problem slide. This may be done in a slide or two, depending on how complex it is. And then,
Shariff,
yep.
yeah. Are you sharing your screen?
Not yet. I'll jump into that in a bit. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, and then the next part is your target market or the opportunity. Now, this could be a market size and what is the general opportunity that you're targeting, right? And then after that, you can go into your solution, right? Once you validated that, the problem truly exists and it's big enough and interesting enough to be solved, and the market is huge enough, you'll go into your solution, right? How you plan to solve the problem, right? And once you go into your solution, this could be a slide or two, and then you go into how do you make money, right? What is the business model, or the potential business model, or the potential revenue streams, right? And then, best of all, if you can show, what sort of traction that you've done. Assuming you're a post-launch company, you want to have your traction slide, right? The traction slide is usually like the killer slide, because that can help show that you've already launched, you're in the market, you have some data points, you have some key learnings, and hopefully you're killing it, right? Like you're doing really well and you're having this hockey stick growth. At some point, you might also have your competition slide, right? Like, to help your investors know that what the competition landscape is, right? And how you compare against the competition. Now, a rookie mistake is usually, some people will say, oh, we're the only one doing this, there's no one else doing this. The thing is, if you look hard enough, you'll find someone else who's doing it. And it's always good to have a competition, or the closest competition to compare to, because that helps validate the market that you're in as well. So don't be afraid of competition. And then at some point, you will also have your team slide, right? This is who you are and why you're the right person to do it. And then, of course, you might cover a bit of your financials, especially if you have traction, or if you want to look through your unit economics and all that. And then finally, you have your ask slide, and this is the all important, like, what do you want to raise and what you plan to give away, right? This might be communicated from a perspective of, I want to raise X amount of dollars. This is the valuation that we have. This then implies that this is the amount of percentage of the company that you plan to give away. There's also other ways of framing an ask, and I'll go through that, when I run my own presentation slide in a bit, right? So that's the general layout or a safe guide to preparing a pitch deck. Those 10, 11, key points, right? And finally, you might end it with hopefully not with a thank you slide, but one with your contact details and your name and how they can follow up with you, right? So that's the general framework. So what I want to do is to give much more context as to how that slide might be. I'm going to very quickly share my screen and take you through my own pitch. Alrighty, present now, present entire screen. All right, let's do this. And feel free to type in the chat screen if there's one your questions, or we can also leave the questions towards the end and can do Q&A later. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump straight into my pitch. It'll take about 5-6 minutes or so, and then I'll walk you through to explain my thought process behind each pitch, right? So here we go, and always start with Bismillah. So hi everyone, my name is Shariff, and I am the founder of Outpost. At Outpost, our mission is to help modernize street food vendors and integrate them into the modern society. So everyone has got to eat. And starting a food business used to be a great way to earn cash. That's how my grandparents, that's what my grandparents did when they moved to Singapore some 60 years ago. That's what my parents did as well when they had me some 30 over years ago. And we knew of friends and family who also did the same thing to earn an extra quick buck on the side. But you see, today it has become increasingly difficult to do so. Now, to open a food business, you supposedly have to have a restaurant. And though it's seemingly desirable, but the cost structure of running a restaurant today is not so sustainable, right? It costs anywhere between $100,000 to $200,000 to set up a restaurant, and then it might cost another $10,000 to $20,000 a month just to run it. If you're lucky, you might make some profit in 2 to 3 years' time. If not, you might end up losing money. True story. That's me, a younger version of me, when I set up a full stack food delivery business. While everything went fine initially, but we had to close it down due to unsustainable cost structure. Now, on the flip side of that, you've got your street food vendors. There's hundreds of thousands of them across developing cities. They cost less than $1,000 to set up, and they're much more mobile, resilient, responsive to demand, and not run the risk of being threatened by landlords, right? However, they run the real risk of literally being taken off the streets due to hygiene and regulatory pressures. So, but what if we can have the best of both worlds? Meaning the cost effectiveness and mobility of street carts plus the high fidelity operational and hygiene standards of restaurants. See, setting up one restaurant can easily deploy 100 street carts. And more importantly, it could fund 100 folks to also earn a living for themselves. So there's also that social impact component here. So at Outpost, we truly believe that it's a basic right of everyone to be able to earn cash by starting a micro food business. And to that end, we want to help raise the economic, social, and operational standards of the average street food vendor, while helping the local communities have access to clean, yet affordable food on a daily basis. So what we're trying to do essentially is level up this guy and provide them a more efficient and hygienic way of operating on the street. And what we've learned is that when we enable this, it then allows us to work with established brands to also take their business to the streets, where once upon a time, street food vendors were seen unhygienic and not so desirable. Once we solve the hygiene and the operational standards, it enables established brands to have a much more cost-effective way to reach out to their customers. So to enable this, we've got a full stack solution, which is a combination of software, hardware, and foodware. Now, on the hardware side, we're basically trying to look at how we could reimagine the good old street cart. Introducing to you the Street Smart Cart. Think of it as the Tesla of street carts, but at a price point of a Toyota. Every one of our street carts has got a modular setup, Depending on the food item that you sell, you could hot swap your cooking equipment. It's got a chest chiller to keep your meat produced fresh, a water dispenser to ensure they have access to clean water as they roam around the streets, and a GPS tracker Wi-Fi to help broadcast their location. It's also got a power unit so that merchants do not have to be connected to the grid to run their business. Price point, it starts as little as $1,000. And for a little bit more, you could have the e-bike or even a motorbike version. But here's the best part. It should cost our merchants $0 upfront. That's right, $0 upfront to be in business. Thanks in part due to our microfinancing partners. What we then do is do a backward integration to ensure that only trusted source of food, which originates from a central kitchen, gets supplied to our merchant, so that we make sure that the entire supply chain is not conflicted, right? We then do a forward integration into all your modern payment platforms, delivery platforms, and you also give a mobile point of sale app to our merchants to enable them to manage their business digitally. This then enables a new set of user experience for our consumers to discover and order their food products straight from the merchants. We focus to innovate deep within the street cart level and the supply chain level, and we work with all your existing payments and delivery platforms. Ideally, we like to build a product that integrates nicely into your super app players so that we can tap on their user base and save on the user acquisition costs. Now, how do we make money? Just to be clear, at Outpost, we're not selling hardwares. Instead, what we try to do is to help our merchants be able to sell more and in a better way, and we partake in that value creation. So, for example, when we help them obtain trusted source of food supplies from central kitchen, we make roughly about 20 to 40% of the margin. When we sell direct to end consumers, we make anywhere between 100% to even 10% of the margin, depending if it's sold by us or sold by our franchisee. But here's where things can get interesting. Given the digital capabilities that we've built into our street smart cards, there's a real possibility for us to add on other layers of revenue streams, such as digital advertising, topping out of your SIM cards, or payment for your electric bills, or even handling of e-commerce packages on behalf of e-commerce companies. And if things works well within the food industry, there's a possibility for us to expand to other verticals as well. But for a start, we're focused within the street food ecosystem, and we want to offer value to both consumers, merchants, as well as the government agencies to help them better manage street carts and help them be recognized to be an integral part of society. In terms of competition, while one may argue that, how do we compete against the likes of cloud kitchens or food delivery platforms, we think they are complementary partners within the ecosystem. Instead, our competitors are your traditional carts or even malls and restaurants. But like I said earlier, we try and combine the best of both worlds so that we could build a new retail experience. In terms of the market, it's huge. Every day, 2.5 billion people consume from street food vendors around the world. In Indonesia itself, the market that we plan to launch first, there's over 500,000 street food vendors that needs to upgrade their business. And like I said, brands are now looking this as a new viable way to reach out to their customers. So there's tremendous headroom for growth. And once we get our playbook right in Indonesia, there's a real possibility for us to expand to other emerging markets. So now is really the right time. Brands are looking for more cost-effective ways to reach to their customers. Street food business needs to upgrade their business to stay in business. And at Outpost, we're providing the end-to-end solution. In terms of team, we've got a right combination of experience and youth. So Adri runs a workshop that has built hundreds of these wooden carts. Now I'm helping him build a modern version of that. Ari runs a local franchise business, so he knows the on-the-ground operations. And like I said earlier, my family and I have got generations of experience in the food business. And I used to run a mobile development studio as well. So some of our team members are on board in building the digital experience side of things. We're looking to raise $500,000 on a safe note. And we so far raised about a third of that amount. So join us, not only in empowering street food vendors, but also in shaping the future of micro retail. Thank you. So that would be the end of the typical pitch that I've done. If you time it, that's probably about 7 minutes or so, right? So usually it's between 5 to 10 minutes. And then what you would have after that is a bunch of appendix, right? These are the things which may be important or may come up in the Q&A session, and you want to be well prepared about it. And this could include your development roadmap. It may include your marketing or your merchant acquisition strategy. In this case, for us, merchant acquisition is key. And then if there's a onboarding process for your customers, for your brands, you might want to map that out as well. Unit economics, more insights into your competition, your mock-ups and whatnots, right? So I'll cover that more in a bit. But what I want to do now is go straight back to the top of the pitch. So if you notice, I started off with giving a quick overview as to what is the mission of Outpost. And I think that is key because you want to help people understand what is this big picture that you're trying to solve, but yet in a tangible and relatable way. So I mentioned that at Outpost, our mission is to help modernize street food vendors. Very clear, very straight to the point. They know who our potential target audience and what's the value that we plan to offer to them, right? I then started off by giving a bit of a personal story. Personal story in the sense that, we established that the market is huge, people got to eat, and starting a food business used to be a great way to earn cash. That's how my grandparents started. That's how my parents started. And then eventually, even at some point, I mentioned that I even did the same thing, right? So if you notice, what I did here is I interweave that personal story very quickly in the early part of the presentation. This is a way for us to help establish a form of authority, right? It will be helpful for your investors to know that you have some domain knowledge, like you have some personal experience in this. You have experienced this personal pain point, or you've observed it through your family members or friends or within your community. So this is something that I helped to establish from the start. Keep in mind that when you do a pitch, it's really a story, right? Don't think of a pitch as this very structured 11, 12 points that you're trying to get across. Think of it as you're bringing someone through a story, just like how you watch, a 30 minutes sitcom on TV, or your Games of Thrones, or your I don't know what is the 2-hour-long Titanic movie or 3 hours long movie, is to bring people through the ups and downs of the storyline, right? And similarly, a pitch should exactly be that. So very early on, I established the mission of the company, that we've got a bit of experience in it, and we've observed it for a very long time, and we've got some actual hands-on experience in it, right? And then I introduced the problem in itself, right? So starting a food business is very expensive. Compare that to a less legitimate and but more cost-effective way, right? So there's a direct contrast here, and that's also how I designed the slide, so you're able to show the two sides of the coin. And then for us, like I said, it's very important to have the best of both worlds, right? That is my approach. So in your case, it depends on what is the problem that you're solving, and if there's something for you to compare it to. When you compare it to, very quickly people can see, the two extremes and establish a dichotomy in their mind, right? So that's one of the approach. And then I help make things a bit more tangible by comparing how the cost of deploying one restaurant can actually deploy 100 street carts. Now, in our case, we're able to show this. For yours, it might have a different way, but the point is, again, we're trying to draw a comparison, right? So they can very quickly get a tangible sense as to what we're trying to do. Also, in terms of design, you can see we put in quite a fair bit of effort in this. Some might consider this a bit of an overkill, but we constantly, at the background of it, you could see, we compare a restaurant and a street cart. So that's a bit of that subtle, subliminal way of putting that point across. And then next, again, we touch on a bit more on the mission. And then we make it in a more tangible way of how we envision the product to be. I decided to just give a bit of a sneak peek rather than showing the product at the get-go. This is just a visual representation of what it is. Now, what I've noticed is that founders tend to want to show their product in its full detail. I understand your product is brilliant and you want to show it in its full glory, but that will take up too much time, right? So if you could encompass your product in an imagery, whether that being an icon or an image, or just bring out the one or two UI interface, I think that to put the point across, I think that's sufficient for us. we did it with this visual, and then we mentioned how this could be relevant to brand. So what I've done here is that I've established that we're not only wanting to work with your street food vendors, but we've also learned that brands can now leverage from this setup, right? So it immediately shows to the audience that we have another target consumer segment. I actually skip this slide because usually in presentation I don't cover this, but in Q&A or in a longer discussion, I would also cover the various client types that we have, so that they know that we've got various paths to go to market or various paths of monetization, and we have a different way of selling to each client type. So it's key for them to understand that we know the various personas of our target audience, right, or our clients. But the point to note, like, it's not necessary for you to have a wall of text like this and cover every one of them. Just pick out one or two key guys and then you move on, right? And you have a chance to go deeper into it, you could do it. In fact, this particular slide, I could think of 10 different ways of how one could improve on this, right? Try and avoid wall of text, like, try and do more pictures and more storytelling, right? And then the next side is you have so I start in going deeper into our solution. In our case, it's very important for us to say that we're an end-to-end full stack comprehensive solution provider. So this is a key slide to communicate that. It's optional. And then here's where it gets a bit more tricky. We go into the in-depth factor of each of the key components. We've got the hardware bit. I use this as an opportunity to also touch a bit on the hardware price point, so that people know it's not too expensive. And then we also, this is a key component, right? When we say it's $0 upfront, it helps reduce or de-risk the situation of, oh, hardware, very expensive. We don't invest in hardware, there's CapEx, blah, blah, blah. We try and show that we've managed to figure a way on how to help merchants be able to afford our solution, but not be, the cost is not prohibitive for them, right? So it's a key thing that we put this out right now. For your product or your solution, it might have you might not have this issue, but this is just how we walk around problems around, like, potential hiccups or issues around cost, right? And then we show that we understand the whole value chain, and that's the supply chain side of things, and then how we integrate into other potential partners, right? And if you notice, I just showed only 2 UI mockups of how our product might look like. In the appendix side, we've got like the entire mockup, sorted out, right? Like, people, if let's say we've got a mentor or an advisor or a potential investor who is more into the UX side of things, then we can jump in and show them, this is how the user experience or the user flow works, so that we can really dig deep into the user experience side of things, right? And they know that we've thought through the digital user experience of the product, right? But we leave this all the way within the appendix and not within the main slides itself. So the main slides, all you need is just some kind of a teaser, enough for people to understand that you have a digital component to the product. And then this is an optional slide. I basically just say we kind of understand who our key partners, and this is a point where I emphasize this is the area where we focus in, and we wouldn't want to be distracted by the rest. And it's just established that point. This is an optional bit, right? Another optional bit is also if you want to tap on potential partnerships. I put it in there, but sometimes I leave it out or I skim past it depending on the time that I have. And then you go into your business model or your revenue model. Ours can be quite complex, but we try to have a good overview of it. If you notice, I've reused some of the elements of the other slides when we showed the supply chain. We then use the same thing to also describe the business model, right? In your case, it might be a bit different. You might just have a slide with some price point and your SaaS pricing, and the features of your SaaS pricing. If that works for you, that's great. I also use this opportunity to very quickly talk about the bigger picture. If these things, if what we're trying to do works within the food supply chain, we could potentially go into other revenue streams and other verticals, right? So that helps, again, build a bigger picture and shows that you as a founder or you as a team, you've thought about what is the bigger version, what is bigger picture of the business that you can build, what is version 10.0, but yet you're rooted on the ground and you're focused on building this version 0.1, right? Unit economics, this is optional. You can bring this on, during your pitch, or this can also be in your appendix slide. I recommend this to be in the appendix slide. So in the event you meet an investor who's less about user experience or product, but they want to talk more about dig deep into the financials, then, in our case, we can bring it down to the cut level unit economics, right? Others, you may have your projections, you may have your bigger picture numbers, that's fine as well, depending on what stage of the startup you're at. We decided to have a slide on the cut level unit economics, because for us, if we show that on the cut level we can make a profit, then I think from a organization wide or a platform wide or a marketplace wide, we can also make a decent income from it, right? This is an optional slide. It's just trying to wrap up the entire objective of what we're trying to do. And then is the competition. There's various ways how you can show how you stack up against the competition. But the metrics table like this, where you compare, what your features got and what others don't have, is a good starting point. Some would argue that, this sort of comparison, it's a bit childish, right? Because obviously yours is going to have everything and others won't have everything. But it depends on how mature your startup is, right? Like if you have other points or metrics of comparison, then fine, you can bring it up there as well. But at minimum, this is what you should do to show that you are aware of what, first of all, who the competition are and how you compare to them, right? If you remember during my pitch, I did mention and acknowledge that within the ecosystem, there's also other players like cloud kitchens and delivery platforms. And I mentioned that we see them as complementary services rather than competing services, right? So that's a way of how I established that I'm aware of these other guys and we think that we could work together with them. And instead, we acknowledge that there are other folks who are competitors. So I think that's a key point also, to show some level of matureness and awareness of who your competitors might be and who you might work closer with or not, right? Then we choose to go into the market slide after the competition at this point. Some of you might choose to cover market and opportunity at an earlier part of your pitch. That's fine as well. You feel free to move the segments of your slides around depending on your comfort level or what you think makes more sense. For us, we leave the market opportunity till later, so we can then further emphasize that it's a huge opportunity, right? If you remember during our pitch, I mentioned that 2.5 billion people from around the world consume from street food vendors. So I started off with the big picture, right? And then I narrowed down to, well, we are focused in Indonesia first. This is where we plan to launch. This is roughly what we feel that market size might work. And if we do well there, then we can expand elsewhere. So again, going from macro to micro. Again, this was actually one of the harder, more difficult slides for us to do, because obtaining the data points and numbers was really tricky. Asking, what is the number of street food vendors there are in the world? That's like asking how many drug lords there are in the world, right? Obviously, those people, who operate illegal businesses, it's kind of hard to know the market size. For us, street food vendors, while, they do a halal business, right? But still, they are sometimes considered a illegal hawker business on the side of the road. So there's no real proper data set for that. So we had to really dig deep and then figure a way how do we visualize a very number-heavy content, right? So this is the best that we managed to do, but the point is, try to use visuals to show what is a big number and then focus on certain areas that you want to kickstart first with. The thing is, as a startup, you cannot go and boil the ocean. You need to focus on a certain area. So I think showing that you understand the big opportunity, but where to start off first, I think is key. And then, we talk about when is the right timing, right? So we say now is the right timing. Again, we summarize who we plan to offer our solution to. So it's important to just have a bit of this messaging that now is the time, right? Timing is what matters in running a startup as well. So I think if you could put that point across, it's great. And then there's a team. So we try and establish that, we've got experience here and a combination of youth and experience and tech and analog. digital and analog. So I think you could also use that. And the most important slide is the us. So here we try to be very clear with two things. One is how much we plan to raise, on what instrument we plan to raise, and how we plan to deploy the funds, right? So very from the get-go, we just say we're doing a pre-seed round, very clear. This is where we are at, either a seed round, pre-seed. We're using a safe note, a convertible note. That's our mode of instrument. Immediately, if you're pitching in a demo day, later stage funds will know that, this is not for us, but the early stage funds who goes with this sort of investment mandate or thesis, they will know that, this is basically something that is for us to consider, right? So we've got a very clear us. And also we try and summarize where we think we plan to deploy our funding strategy. So we combine both of this into one slide, and we cover it in about 30 seconds or less. And then of course it's that closing slide. Like I said, don't just have a big giant thank you. Instead, try and have a closing statement of your mission, and then relate it to a bigger picture and leave your contact detail, right? And then that's how you wrap it up with a good call to action, and again, encompassing your mission, and then you open it up to Q&A, right? And then you have your appendix slides all ready to go into things. So yeah, hopefully you've gotten a better sense as to not just the structure of a pitch slide, but a presentation deck, but also the thinking into what those components are when we talk about problem, solution, team, market size, competition, and all that sort of stuff, right? So yeah, happy to take more specific questions in relation to your context, and then we can take it from there.
All right, mashallah. Thank you, Shariff, for the very, very comprehensive and detailed.
I hope that was helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely helpful for me. I have a lot of work to do now on my pitch deck. Can we engage you as a consultant?
I'm happy as a friend. I'm happy to be a sounding board anytime, bro. Just give me a buzz.
Okay, so I do not have so many slides. I will jump straight to my portion, and then we'll go to the Q&A or the chat. Yeah. So feel free to type in your questions now. Some of you may forget, or you may get distracted by other things that we talk about. So feel free to just populate the chat, type out whatever you want to ask, and later, inshallah, we'll get to it. Now, my presentation is very short. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yep, all's good.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so I only have like 3-4 slides, not counting this slide. And what I want to do is I want to jump in a little bit randomly to what I think is very important. So I'll talk about the different types of investors and how you can enhance your value. And in the end, something a little bit technical about how you could potentially give yourself a valuation, right? Now, this first slide is very, very important. But before that, maybe very quickly, introduction about myself. I've been an entrepreneur since I was 18, which is 18 years ago, 19 years ago. So about half my life. And I started as an entrepreneur, and how things are today is totally seriously worlds apart. And I would say it's worlds apart in a very positive or optimistic way. Today is really not easy, but a much easier time, a much better time to be a founder than 15 years ago, right? At that time, if you are a young business person trying to do your own business, people won't take you seriously. Typically, people may even, laugh at you. Who's this kid? Who's this 18, 20-year-old kid trying to do something, trying to do business? But now it's different. Now it's trendy. Now it's cool. So not only that, but the environment has changed a lot, and there's a lot more awareness on the value, contributions of startups, and there's so much precedence of success, and there's investor money also potentially up for grabs, as well as grant money and other kinds of support. So I just wanted to share with you my journey in talking to investors, dealing with investors, raising funds for ourselves, and also our core business for Ethis is dealing with investors. not for ourselves, but for other people's projects, for other projects on our platform. So I deal with investors quite a lot, alhamdulillah. And from there, we get various kinds of perspectives and understanding of how investors work. So for startup funding, I'm no expert, but I've had quite a lot of experiences. In the past 6 years since Ethis set up, we've actually had, for example, I can share with you, we've had about 3 acquisition offers, but all those 3 came when we were not prepared to be acquired. And in fact, we were not that interested to be acquired also. It's just that the offer came, and so we looked at the offer. Yeah, but that's why today, alhamdulillah, with a lot more experience, a lot of people around me who can share with me their insights and expertise, then today I'm in a much better position to understand what kind of investor we should go for and when. And that's what I want to share with all of you in the next slide. All right. So just quick disclaimer, I'm not an expert. I've not raised millions. Okay, maybe millions, but not in the tens of millions. Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, it's not about how much you raise, but it's not about that number, like you raise 10 million, 20 million, 100 million, whatever. It's about whether you're raising for what you need for yourself from the right investors. Okay. So don't say like, oh, that startup similar like me, they raised 10 million. I need to raise 10 million as well. Or even at a small scale, he raised 100,000. I'm trying to raise 20,000. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. It's not about the amount. It's about whether you really need it, and also to some extent, or to a large extent sometimes, who you're getting it from. Okay, so here are some very different types of investors, and in the typical startup space, they are quite distinct from each other, I would say. But especially in the Islamic space, is a little bit mixed up in the sense that, for example, number one, angel investors, typically in the normal startup world, they are small investors, right? Angel investors in some cases that I know of, they invest a few $1,000s, and that is something that's acceptable in that market. But for the Muslim world, typically those who have the capacity and interest to invest as an angel investor may have a large amount or a larger amount to invest. Whether you're from a wealthy country or a developing country, those who are looking to invest in startups, typically in the Muslim world, would have some capacity to invest. Yeah. So angel investors, almost always it's at the early stage, unless at a later stage you're having a very strategic investor come in as an angel investor because you want that person, not because you want that fund. Yeah. So number one is typically at the early stage, and angel investors, they are human beings, they are individuals, they're not a corporate entity with a mandate, with investors, with shareholders to report to, and so on. This is a person with extra money, yeah, and he's looking to invest, or he's potentially looking to invest, and so he will invest with you or in you, or he or she will invest in you as a person. And that's my experience, right? In the early days, it's always people who believe in your mission or believe in you, and or people who are looking for something in the market, and they find that you fit the bill. Yeah. In Islamic finance, let me just give a bit of insight into some of the top thought leaders in Islamic finance. In my history, in my experience, from really from almost nothing, we started with a 2-man show for the first 2 years. When I met big shots in Islamic finance, a lot of them actually have this strong desire to bring Islamic finance to a different kind of outcome, meaning to have it to be more inclusive, more impactful, more Sharia based. And so if you're a fintech startup in the Islamic space and you're doing something that, for example, like Outpost, by the Shariff's business, to help micro entrepreneurs, to help small business, F&B businesses, then that's something that some of these significant individuals in this industry, whether they are CEOs of banks or whether they are top Sharia scholars, they typically will find it more interesting or more appealing, because deep down inside, they also want to see this kind of impact from Islamic finance or from the huge institution they are from, but they're not set up to do that. So this is where you can get angel investors who are not just investors, but also people who want to support what you are trying to do, assuming you're trying to do something good, of course, right? So that's the first one, and that's very, very important. So how is this relevant to the pitch deck, for example? then your angle, your positioning, your focus will be more on the mission, more on the people, more on the reason. Like Sharif also shared at the start, his personal experience, his family background, and so on. So that appeals also to angel investors. Yeah. Now, VCs and PEs, again, this is just my opinion, right? And of course, there's so many types of investors. Every investor, every angel investor is different. Every VC is different. But these are just some general guidelines from my observations and my experience. For VCs, they're looking for growth typically, although right now, from my understanding, some VCs are also looking at sustainability more. That means, can you make money to sustain your business instead of always having to raise funds, right? Which was a model that was, getting out of hand before the COVID and before the WeWork fiasco, if you're familiar with that. So VCs still look at startups that go for, that have the potential to grow fast. And maybe I can also group some of the more sophisticated angel investor groups into this category. I know of one Islamic angel investor group, and they are very, very stringent because their mindset is a very VC mindset where, I mean, you've probably heard of this. You invest in 10 startups, half will fail, 3 or 4 will do not bad, and 1 will grow big. And the whole reason why they're investing in 10 is to get that 1, right? And that is the mindset, which is why they look for this potential. And angel investor groups also may be the same. So this one particular group that I know, they look very much at disruptive technology, which is very risky because that disruptive technology may, may become obsolete, may be overtaken, something may go wrong with the product or whatever, right? Especially in fintech. But that's what they look for because they feel that's how they're going to find that 1, right? So that's how VCs tend to think about it. Private equity firms, I mean, to be frank, in the Muslim world, in Islamic finance, there are actually very few Islamic VCs. I believe there is a large group of angel investors who are already, maybe not so large group already investing, but there's a large group that could potentially be activated to invest. And that's why I urge all of you to go and try, because we need to push this in the market. The money is there. Inshallah, the investors will come. But for VCs, there are very few, although conventional VCs do have an interest from my experience in the Islamic space. So that's up to your personal comfort level. It's not wrong to take investment from non-Muslims as long as you can maintain the spirit and the integrity of the Islamic finance and compliance. But for PE firms, it's basically a little bit different or difficult, I would say, for most of us, unless we have very significant propositions or size for them to look at. PE meaning private equity firms. They usually look for profitability, the ability to potentially acquire other companies. They call it a business mode or your competitive advantage. That's number 3. So I won't talk so much about that. But number 4 is very interesting. Corporate investors, Islamic banks, Islamic financial institutions, or even generally big companies, listed companies, successful companies. They may be an interesting avenue because sometimes they are open to investing in a small business or a new business, a startup that is in the early stages, if they see something there that they really want to have for themselves, right? That can be good or bad, but I will not go into that into detail today. But basically, they want to do something and they know it will be too expensive or take too long or be too difficult for them to do it. And so they can outsource it to a startup by investing in the startup or by acquiring the startup even. Yeah, so there's something very interesting, but doing a B2B corporate deal is typically something that takes a long time and requires you to have a good understanding of how they work or have good relationships with people in that company or the institution and so on, right? But sometimes these companies and these banks do have programs. So they launch a program for startups to be part of their incubation program, for example, with the opportunity to work together with the bank, yeah, or whatever institution. So that's something that you should also always look out for to see whether it's suitable for your solution. And the last one, and I'm going to make it very clear here that I'm going to be a little bit biased, because what we do at Ethis is crowdfunding. And equity crowdfunding, whether Ethis or otherwise, in the market, just do your own searches online, is already having a huge, just 2 years ago, There was data. I don't have it with me now, but there's some verified data from a report which showed that equity crowdfunding investments has surpassed VC investments. Not equity, sorry, crowdfunding or marketplace investments in general has surpassed VC investment. Yeah. And how did that happen? It's not only because more money is coming from the crowd, but also because VCs are investing via crowdfunding platforms. And that's a real game changer. Why does the VC do it? So instead of investing in 10, now they can invest in 50 or 100 because the platform aggregates their investment. And from your perspective, you have that opportunity to reach out to more investors through platforms, right? Of course, this is not something that's always available easily for everyone, but it's definitely more flexible, in terms of how platforms view projects and deals that want to raise funds. And also, typically, it's faster, right? In getting an investor into your company, I would say it takes at least 3 months. If you're lucky, typically it can take up to 6 months or longer to get an investment into your business. But for equity crowdfunding, it can happen in a month or two, depending on the platform. Yeah. And at Ethis in Malaysia, we will be doing equity crowdfunding for startups, but it is not our main focus. But inshallah, we will be looking out for startups to provide funds to through the crowd. So these are the 5 types of investors that you can look at, and they're all very different. So it's good for you to do a bit more research to understand who you want to go for and how you want to do it. At the end of the day, the pitch deck that Shariff shared with you, those basics always need to be there. It's just how you're going to position it a little bit differently to suit the interest or the nature of the investor that you're talking to. Yeah. All right. So one slide done, and this is a jumbled mix of things that will help you raise funds. Right, things that I can think of that I identify top 6 things that will really help in your fundraising as an Islamic fintech. Firstly, license, sandbox, regulatory endorsement. I did not add it here. Sharia endorsement can also help. That's number 1. Right, some products don't need this, but sometimes even if there's no license for what you do or you don't need a license, it's good to show how you are credible from the eyes of the authorities or other institutions that maybe you're working with. Number 2 is to get reputable, proven individuals in your team. If I think somebody chatted just now, how do you find people to join your team? So this at the start, maybe you cannot afford to pay others, right? So there are various ways, various mechanisms. They can be, for example, advisors. If you know anybody in the industry who's credible, speak to that person, get his advice, and offer him to be on your advisory board. There are a lot of articles online you can read about getting advisors. There are pitfalls as well as benefits, so you have to choose carefully. Number 3, if you have relationships that you can prove or show with credible financial institutions, that will definitely help a lot, right? I mean, any institution that is significant and you have a relationship, a business relationship, a contract, a pilot, whatever it may be, this will definitely help enhance your value. And number 4, related to number 3, if it's a business contract or at least an MOU, although MOUs are not so credible sometimes or not so valuable, but at least you have something is better than nothing, right? So show how you have business tied up, your pipeline, your future business. For example, you want to collaborate, for example, Shariff Raffi's Outpost platform or business to provide cards. Maybe he has an MOU with the Chamber of Commerce, right? And they have 1,000 vendors, for example. So those are things that give you a pipeline that will help enhance your value. Number 5 is join all these competitions. There's so many competitions, grants. Don't join everything for the sake of it, but selectively make sure you're actively, joining such competitions, because if you get a grant or if you win a competition or you get into the top 10 or anything like that, or even just complete a program, that inshallah will give you more credibility and help to drive your value with your investors. And the last one, of course, this is not always easy, but if you have a lead investor or one investor who's in and who's significant and putting in a significant amount, it helps you get more investors. If you have an investor who's putting in a small amount but who's very credible, they can help you as well. Of course, better if you have a combination of the two. So when Shariff was sharing his pitch just now, he mentioned he already has 30% funded or raised, right? So that brings confidence to me. Oh, he's not looking for his first dollar. He already has 30%. He needs another 70%. Maybe I can come in, and I'll definitely want to know who's that first investor, right? If I'm the investor. So these are 6 things for you to consider. And if you have any of this, then it will help you, inshallah, in your fundraising process. Now, my last slide may be a bit complicated, but essentially a tricky part on valuation of your company, which you need to have, right? You need to be able to present and also back up or validate your valuation of yourself so that investors can buy into it or at least negotiate. But we don't have time to go into that today. And there's a lot of material already available online. But one thing that you could try to do is to have a comparison table. This is a little bit more detailed, and probably will not be in your pitch deck. This will be for later rounds of due diligence once the investor is already interested and sign some intent or something. So here, what we did for ourselves, this is a real table that we came up with our team. We wanted to raise. We are a crowdfunding investment company in Southeast Asia, and so we looked at publicly available data. There's also paid data that's more difficult to get. You can pay service providers to get it. But this we found online or through friends. And we kept the companies as anonymous. And we showed, when they raised and how much they raised and what size they were when they raised. And we showed some ratios. And then from there, we use this to derive some conclusions. Right? You can see those three main points there. 8 startups in our space, investment crowdfunding, raised funds from VCs. And out of these 8, 6 got another round of funding, raising about 3 times more money. So what does this show? This shows that once they got money the first time, these investors want to come in again. And that's what I said in the last point. 4 round 1 investors participated in round 2. So investors are happy when they invest the first time, they want to invest again. And this also shows that the industry is healthy and growing. From the few 8 startups, this is the outcome, is really great. So this helps us a lot especially if we get investors from other parts of the world who are not familiar with Southeast Asia or our region where we operate, right? So these are my 3 slides that I hope has provided some value to all of you, inshallah. And now we can go to the Q&A. Or maybe, Shariff, do you have anything you want to say about these slides?
Sure. Yeah. Actually, I have a couple of things to add. Going back to this first slide, right? And maybe we can do this together. So we all know who are the personas of the investor, but just as a bit of guideline, I think for angel investors, usually, when you're trying to raise your first tens of thousands of dollars, your first $100,000 to $500,000, it might be good to raise from an angel or a combination of angel. Usually, angels will write like about 10 to $20,000, $50,000 checks. There are some super angels who would like cover the entire round, like $100,000, $150,000. And then you also have angel syndicates, right? Where syndicates just means you have a lead angel investor and a few of them come together and join together to be part of that special purpose vehicle. So they function a bit like a VC in that sense. VCs generally will write upwards of $500,000. Some of the earlier stage VCs, they will invest $500,000, $1 million to 2. And then the later round VCs will write bigger check size. They call it check size, but in reality these days nobody really gives you a check. Sometimes they do, but usually it's just a direct bank transfer. But we use the term check size quite a fair bit. Don't be surprised if you hear terms like $1 or $2. It's a very banking term to use. $1 meaning $1 million or $2 million. And so those are the various check size they will write at different stages. Corporate investors, I agree with Brother Umar. They would tend to be aligned more from a strategic point of view. Although there are some corporate investors who don't invest straight from your balance sheet, right? They have a unique special fund that then they have a much more freer mandate to invest for financial upsides rather than just a strategic reasons. Moving to your next slide. What was the next slide again? Yes. Okay. So going on to the third slide, I actually want to very quickly share my screen as well. So Umar brought up a really good point around, capital fundraising.
Let me just stop sharing.
Yep. Stop sharing, please. Thanks. Okay. Let me just hijack the screen real quick. So I think if you notice in my slide earlier, I have this thing around a development roadmap, right? So in our slide, we were very clear with what we wanted to raise and what is the what we wanted to raise and what is the instrument that we want to use, right? So Umar mentioned that it's key to figure out your valuation and all that. If you're a super early stage startup, chances are you don't even know what your valuation is, right? And usually valuations are set by, a institutional investor or a lead investor at a later stage of your venture. So for a start, if you're not quite sure what your valuation is, or if you can't agree on a valuation, you could use this instrument called a convertible note, or ideally a safe. See, the problem with convertible notes, there's usually an interest rate component, but if you want to be a bit more Sharia compliant, a safe note, a simple agreement for equity, or a simple agreement for future equity, basically just means the amount of money that people invest today, your angel investor invest today, can convert into equity at a later stage, depending on the valuation that is set by a later stage investor, right? So the first part is, we're clear about our ask, but then what I have in our deck is also in relation to what Umar shared earlier, but in a slightly more visual way. And we also merge that with our development roadmap. So within this two slides here, I couldn't combine it into one slide. We merge our product development or venture development strategy along with our capital raising strategy, right? So you notice here, I very clearly say, okay, for pre-seed stage, some of you might skip the pre-stage, you might just pre-seed, you might just go straight to seed. By the way, pre-seed and seed just means pre-seed, you might raise a smaller amount from angel investors. Seed might be a larger amount, right, from institutional investors. That's the case how we map it. Some of you might treat the pre-seed as a seed. So there's just, small terminologies. But yeah, for us, we say that for a pre-seed round, we plan to raise X amount of dollars on a convertible note or a safe note. And these are the various strategies that we plan to put in place, right? Remember, when you're earlier stage startup, you don't really have much to show. So you may want to share a bit more about your strategy and your thinking and also around your mission. And then we mentioned that, in our seed stage where we plan to raise, I don't write it here, but I would usually say we plan to raise $1 or $2 or $1 million or 2 million, which implies us, and then at a certain valuation, right, post or pre-money valuation, then this is where our angel investors would convert to the next stage. So when you show this to your investors, they know that you're not only thinking about building a product or building a company that matters to your consumers, but you as a CEO or as a founder or a co-founder have a thinking around your capital mapping strategy, right? Your fundraising strategy. That is very, very, very crucial when you're trying to build a venture-backed company, because you do not want to be in a position where you don't think ahead of what you plan to raise. And then you ended up having a bad fundraising round at a terrible valuation, which no one would be able to come on board in your next round. So you do want to go through this process of thinking through what is your fundraising exercise. So I think that's a very, very important bit that's covered in the third slide. And I just want to show a slightly different way of doing it. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Sharif. So yeah, let's get some questions answered. I think I saw a few questions just now. Let me also just share a link to my slide. Someone is asking for it. Okay.
So yeah, I think for the Q&A, if any one of you guys have also questions that you just want to ask outright, I think you can unmute your mic and just ask the question as well. But in the meantime, let us dig through the Q&A. So thanks for the kind words. I think a number of you found the presentation useful. That's great. I think there's a question for Ethis. Is Ethis limited to Malaysia, Indonesia, or other markets?
Yeah, for Ethis, we're limited to Malaysia, Indonesia, because of the license requirements. But we do intend to have licenses in other countries, especially sort of a global license, which will allow us to operate in various countries at the same time. Yep. So thanks for the question. There's also a few points here on different types of, okay, from Mr. Farouk Raza, thanks for joining us. Alhamdulillah, great to have you here. the first point, definitely, fully agree with that. It's important to know which kind of investor or type of investor to approach at which stage in your business journey you're at. So definitely early stage, very early stage, idea stage is typically all the angel investors, or sometimes the early stage VCs. And the rest, I think I briefly mentioned just now. And but the Farouk also mentioned that SafeNote may have Sharia issues. So yeah, do take some notice on that, whether Sharia compliant or not. Yeah. Any other questions? If there's no questions, other questions here? Valuable. Thank you. Yes, thank you. You're welcome. Sharif slides.
So there's also a question around the I think Rihan asked around the presentation style and themes and color palettes and patterns and all that sort of stuff. Yep, it's true. I mean, if you have uniformity in your slides, it's great, but feel free to use. If you notice, most of our slides, the background is black in color, so there's uniformity in that. Some are in white, but I'm just trying to show a bit of a contrast there, and then using right fonts and color for certain points that we're going to put across. For example, our slide, we put it clearly $500,000 in green, and that stands out, right? So use colors to effect. And in terms of uniformity, it's not just about your presentation slide; it's also your verbal pitch in itself. I've noticed that some startups, or some founding team, they tend to have like 2-3 people pitch or share the stage, right, so to speak. They would have one guy would cover on the solution, another guy would cover the market, and then another guy or girl might cover on the team. The thing is, when people have to go through 2 to 3 different voices in a pitch, subconsciously it takes psychologically it takes a bit of time for them to switch and get in tune to your voice and your style of intonation and all that. So just have one person to pitch throughout the first and the last. You can have your team members on standby for the Q&A session if any one of them is an expert in, let's say, the tech or the market factors. But generally speaking, just have one person carry through the pitch from the start to the end, right? I think there's also another question around funded solely based on your ideas. So as this good old adage or saying goes, ideas are cheap. It's all about execution. But at the same time, everyone starts off as an idea. So I think people invest like what Umar has shared. There's various types of investors. The angel investors typically invest in you as a person. They believe in you. They believe in your story, in your mission. They want to see you succeed. They believe in the problem that you're solving. So it may be sufficient for you just to share, this is why I'm passionate about solving this, for you to get investments from them. VCs and super angels who get more sophisticated, they want to see proof, right? So initially, maybe you might not have launched your product and having revenue or traction or in terms of users, but you could say that you've run certain experiments, you've done certain research, ultimately to de-risk the investment, right? So validating your hypothesis around your problem and your solution statements, I think, is key, and to show that you have some ability to execute. You might have built a prototype or MVP. So don't just let it be as an idea. Try to move from an idea to a prototype, to a mock-up, to some kind of proof that you can have traction. So again, Brother Umar mentioned around, maybe agreements or MOUs or letter of intent that shows you've spoken to your user base and then they're interested in you, right? So it's the more you can build up some of this goodwill in terms of your execution, it'll be more likely that you'll be able to unlock investment across the life cycle.
And I think in general, raising funds of ideas is going to be quite tough unless, for example, you had some successful precedent in the past. You're a founder who built out something, who had done something significant, and or you worked in a certain role that shows that you have some domain expertise, and so then maybe your idea can get funded. But if you are like me, an entrepreneur with no real background, and it's just an idea, it's going to be very, very tough. Yeah. There's another interesting question. I think I briefly touched on this just now, but yeah, maybe it's a good point. how do you assemble a team? Outside collaboration, would networking play a role in building the team? Yeah. So building a team at the early stage, Sharif, how do you do that?
Yeah, so I think being part of a founder, it's in the early days is about selling your, again, getting people to buy into your mission, right? And your vision. So if you think you want to help people, get people to part with their money from their wallet or their bank account into yours is difficult enough, then you should start off first with trying to get people to join you in your mission, right? Either as a co-founder or as an early team member. So the best way to do that is just go out there, talk to people. For all you know, you might find a customer or a user who really believes in what you're building, and they may want to join you and be part of your team. And if you notice in the slide or in our team presentation deck, one of our early brand partners ended up becoming our team member as well, right? Because they believe in it and they want to be part of the journey. So you may not have in early days, you don't think of them as investors or team members or whatever. All you want to have is supporters, right? How do you want to be involved, whether as a co-founder or as an early employee or as a partner or as a pro bono service provider or even investor or even as a customer? Let them decide on their own terms, but you have to be infectiously passionate about what you're building, and get them to believe in you. I think that's very important in the early days.
Yep. Okay, we asked for questions and we have a lot of questions now, I realize. I unfortunately can spend another 5 minutes here. I don't know about Sharif. Sharif, if you can
about
stay on
5-10, I think we're good. Yeah.
5-10 minutes. Okay, yeah. So inshallah, we'll see how we can give some short answers to some of these important questions. One question is challenges Islamic startups may face in raising Sharia compliant funds. I think I can take that one. So the challenge, as I briefly shared earlier, is that it's still very new and there are no real true VCs, or very few real true VCs. There are a few, but they also have limited capacity or limited scope of what they do. Yeah, there's one in Singapore that focus on the Islamic economy. There's one in Malaysia or two in Malaysia. There's one or two in Dubai. And basically, there are general VCs who also look at the Islamic economy or Islamic fintech. So the challenge is a lack of risk capital. And I think that's something very tragic for Islamic finance, because Islamic finance is all about risk sharing and creating productive value and providing and contributing to society, which is what fintech and startups can do very well. So the challenge is there's a lack of awareness and lack of serious venture capital investors. But the opportunity, as I shared earlier, I feel, is that although in between probably the growth stage investors are not there, but there is I do know that there is a large pool of potential angel investors, and that can help startups grow quite significantly already, because they are also super angel investors. And then the big PE firms and the big Islamic finance firms, they're all very big in general. So if you can reach a certain size or a certain level of maturity, then you can potentially attract the bigger guys. Or something that I took note of before our call today is, I truly believe that there's also space for consolidation even at this early stage. Consolidation means collaborating, partnering, merging, acquiring. Okay, I mean, I'm going to touch on this for a while before we go into other questions. But why am I talking about this now? Right? Sometimes it doesn't sound right that you just started or you just about to start and now you want to merge. Of course, not at the idea stage, but once you have some traction, it may make sense for you to look into deeper collaborations with people who may be your competitors or complement, or on the flip side, complementary to you. Because then, if you have, for example, 3 startups coming together of similar size, right? 1 + 1 + 1. If you become one entity, it's 5. That's the way the maths works. It's not 1 + 1 + 1 is 3, right? The saying is the whole is larger than the sum of the parts. Is that correct? Yeah. So there's something you can take note of as well. Right? You don't always need to do everything yourself. If you see another startup team, another founder, another company that's having the same vision or synergy as you, you can explore doing something with them. And Ethis has explored that many times. It's not, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But at the end of the day, at least it's an opportunity that should be explored at some stage, in my opinion. So let's move on. Any questions that you saw?
Yeah, I think there's one interesting question or fundamental question from Noor. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. How do you actually approach any investors? You send them an NDA first or a elevator pitch? So generally speaking, most investors, they don't, especially VCs, they don't sign NDAs because they receive pitch decks and proposals on a daily basis. So the onus is on you to be able to throttle what you share. What I've shared in our presentation pitch deck, it's something that I'm comfortable with that going into the public domain, right? But obviously, I'm not letting the entire cat out of his bag. Quite a fair bit of information we held back, especially when it comes to financial or certain traction numbers and such. So again, general rule of thumb, people won't sign an NDA upfront. Maybe at a slightly later stage when you're going through your data room and doing due diligence and you want to share really internal private numbers and insights, perhaps, right? So a good way to work around that is again have a Twitter pitch, elevator pitch, maybe a one-pager summary of what your business is about. I have a one-page, the entire deck that you saw earlier, I have a one-page PDF of a visual infographic of our business that is sufficient for us to send over WhatsApp and email. Or a teaser deck, right? A teaser deck we might just have like 4 or 5 slides of what you saw earlier. So ultimately, you want to pick interest. If they have interest, they want to have second, third, fourth meeting, and then at some point, maybe if it makes sense, you might want to explore an NDA. But in most cases, sophisticated investors that receive a lot of proposals and such, they wouldn't want to sign an NDA outright. So again, it's go back to the main point. Ideas are cheap. It's all about execution. So the onus is on you with what you want to share. Hope that's helpful in managing expectations.
Yeah, and just a little bit more perspective to what Shariff just shared about your data being shared with others and your ideas being shared with others. At the end of the day, for most of us at least, or maybe even all of us, we are Muslims, and we understand that our risk is really there for us, right? So today, when I'm sharing with you all of these things, I am potentially assisting many competitors, right? But that's fine because your risk is your risk, mine is mine. And if you look at it from a purely business point of view, I need more people to succeed in this space so that I can succeed in this space as well. Because if you're the only or one of the few in Islamic fintech, then investors will question, why isn't it bigger? Why isn't the industry bigger? Why is it only you? Is there something wrong with Islamic fintech such that there's only you, right? How come nobody else wants to do it? So there needs to be success stories, right? And success stories are very, very important. And I think one thing we can learn a lot, from some of these startup centers in different parts of the world, especially in the Western world, and I guess China, maybe Indonesia, is there's just so much open and free sharing and assistance of each other, whether you're competitors or not. And that's a mindset that I think we need to break through for all of us. I just want to take this opportunity to share with you. In this modern world today, you cannot look at competitors as competitors, right? They are co-opetitors. You cooperate with your competitors, right? That's very, very important. And at the start, even my own chairman once told me, Umar, you're inspiring your competitors. And I said, yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. So it's a mindset thing, but inshallah, we're helping each other. There's barakah in what we do as well, and things will move forward. There's one question here that I want to respond to. Can you share some red flags and deal breakers for investors? I think the question is from the investor point of view, I assume, Nur Nadia Najmuddin. So what are red flags that will scare investors? Those kind of, I think that's what she's asking about. Shariff, you want to try?
Well, red flags. I think first signing an NDA. No, I'm kidding. I think consistency in what you're expressing from the early part of your pitch, and and when they do due diligence, it doesn't seem like what it is, right? We've all heard of some of the stories around even established startups, right? Without naming names, where they say they are doing X amount of numbers, but actually they're not. So be sure, as much as you want to show that, your growth is hockey stick and it's amazing and all that, like make sure you're, telling it as what it is. And I think as fellow Muslims, we shouldn't have that as a problem, right? So trust is very, very important. I think another red flag is not having. So some of you guys might be first-time founders, right? And you may not have the prior experience to show that you can execute. So again, don't just leave it as an idea. Do show that you can have had conversations with potential customers or clients or users, right? I think those are the some of the key ones in the early stage of the startups. Maybe at the later stage of startups, maybe some other red flags. I'll let Umar tap on that.
Yep. I think maybe the point I want to add on for this red flags thing, there are possibly multiple, and again, it depends on the investor. But one thing I want to highlight is, while you want to sell yourself, it's important not to oversell or to mention things that maybe are just not possible. Because these investors, especially if they're looking at your space, they probably know what's happening out there or have a good feel of what's happening out there, right? So if you say, I'm going to create the best blockchain ever, it's going to beat all these other blockchains, it's a super Islamic blockchain for 2 billion Muslims, and nobody's ever going to beat me. I think that's going to be a red flag, right? I mean, compared to those big guys who have billions of dollars or at least hundreds of millions, what can you do compared to them? So I'm not saying you can't do much. You can definitely do a lot, but don't oversell in terms of what you can do. And also in Islam, I can't remember the hadith, but there's a very clear hadith on overselling, not on being honest and truthful when you engage in business or when you sell something. So that's something for me that's very important. And I think in general, a red flag for investors would be, it sounds silly, but when you're not prepared, right? Really a lot of applications coming to us as a platform, and they're all not prepared. I'm like, didn't you do a 30-minute Google search to see what you should have in your deck, right? So these kind of simple things happen a lot. Right? You need to go do your research, put in your effort, put in the time, figure out what's the best way for you to pitch, and then go out and do your best. And then you'll make mistakes and you'll learn. So that's fine, right? Just keep going and just keep pushing. And over time, inshallah, you'll reach a point where you're on the right track.
Yeah, I guess one other important red flag is knowing your numbers and your content, right? Basic fundamental stuff like what is your market size? What is the market size of the industry you're in? Who are the incumbent players? Who are your potential competitors, right? Saying, there's no competition. That's a red flag to any investors because they know that the market is big enough and there will be competitors. But let's turn things around a little bit. Umar, what do you think are the red flags of investors, right? We talk about what are the red flags that we may raise to investors, but what sort of red flags do you think we should look out for in potential investors or potential folks that we want to raise money from?
That's a very good question because we need investors, right, to grow your business, but investors also need us. They also need to deploy their funds, especially if you talk about VCs and all that. They have a cycle. They need to make their money work for them. Yeah, but for angel investors, it really depends. What I would say would be a red flag is, outside of scammers or fake investors and all that, real, proper, credible investors who have money, who have capacity, and who know what they're doing, and they want to invest in you. Is there a situation where you may not want their money? So I would say yes. For us, for at least in our experience, we've had that a few times where we had investors interested, but we were not keen to proceed. And I think it's mainly to do with two things. If you have a very clear idea of what kind of investor you want, then of course you have your criteria and you don't just accept any money from anybody, right? But if you don't know, you just need money, you just want to grow, you just need capital, then look for investors who firstly subscribe to your vision and mission, and very, very importantly also, they have the right expectation of the kind of risk of being involved in your business or the kind of returns or potential exits they can have. Because if they don't have that kind of right understanding from the very beginning, and you make it's very clear to you that this investor does not know what he's doing, but he still wants to give you money, then maybe it's wiser not to take it, because it can lead to problems along the down the road if he doesn't understand what he's doing. Yeah. So those are some red flags maybe that I can share. People who are not aligned with you, people who don't understand what you're doing, and people who don't understand the risk or end reward of investing in a early stage business.
Yeah. I think in general, it's just like you have to know your customers, you have to know your potential investors. Oh, and that's also another red flag when investors speak to you, like you want to raise from them, but you do not know whether they're early stage or later stage investors. So do your homework on your investors. You should have a hit list of who you plan to talk to, and then work your way through that list, right? And that takes a bit of research as well. So it's 12 midnight here in Singapore, 12:01 exactly. It's the 10th of
Yep.
September. I mean, yeah, I'll let brother Umar do the wrap up, and I think there may be another couple of questions here and there that may not be covered. But you have my email; you would have seen that from my presentation deck. So I'm happy to let Umar share my email as well in other medium, and be happy to take more questions on a personal level if you wish.
All right. Thank you so much, Sharif. Alhamdulillah. So we've reached the end of today's session. It was supposed to be much shorter, but I think there's a lot of questions, a lot of interest, and I'm also quite tired now. So inshallah, hopefully whatever we've shared is beneficial to all of you. Pay it forward, encourage others, help others, support each other, inshallah. And together, hopefully we can succeed and make a difference in this world. So with that, thank you so much. Good night, good afternoon, and good morning. Assalamualaikum.